Hello everyone, and welcome to my next video. Today I'm going to talk about why abusers batter their victims, what their motivations might be, what they're feeling that makes them behave the way that they do. As a survivor, this video has been difficult to do and that I have to sort of cross the lake into abuser territory to understand where they're coming from and why they do it. So for this video, I'm going to use the term batter to refer to any kind of abuse, be it physical or mental or sexual, whatever. I'll use the terms batterer and victim because they generalize to both sexes. Despite popular belief, men also fall victim to domestic violence. Women can be just as abusive and manipulative as men, sometimes even more so. And just as a disclaimer, not everything in this video will apply to every batterer. Everyone is different. So, to understand the batterer, you have to realize that the abuse stems from the batterer's own deep-seated insecurities. Even if they have a confident public face, most batterers actually have low self-esteem and low self-confidence and are therefore extremely vulnerable. They often have severe trust issues. Batterers usually do love their partners, often obsessively so, which is why batterers are so often described as exceedingly jealous or possessive. They are unable to trust that their partner won't leave them for whatever reason. Therefore, abuse is the result of fear of being betrayed, abandoned, or mistreated in some way. It's quite ironic, actually, fearful batterers causing fearful victims. So what batterers do to avoid being betrayed or abandoned or mistreated is they learn to use violence as a means to control the situation so that the results are always in their favor. The batterer feels the need to have power and control within the relationship in order to feel secure. And it's very important that I make this distinction. Violence is a learned response to a dispute. Battering is not a normal reaction. It's never okay to beat someone or to call someone names when you get upset or when you don't get your way. Battering is a learned behavioral choice. They learn to choose violence as a means to an end rather than to turn to non-violent methods of problem solving. They do this because they have learned that violence gives them power and control over their intimate partner. And in some situations, it's not so much of a need control as it is a perceived right to control. They think that they have a right to boss you around, and it's your job to comply with their demands. The problem is, if you feel like you have a right to something, you also feel the need to defend and uphold that right. The batterer feels that they are entitled to have their demands met, so they learn to use force to make it happen. The batterer sees their partner and other people in their life as extensions of themselves. Other people are merely pawns to manipulate into doing the batterer's bidding. When someone challenges a batterer's control or beliefs, it provokes some sort of violence. And batterers believe all the myths about domestic violence and abuse, such as the common societal myth that abuse is the victim's fault. The batterer truly believes that the victim made them do it. Another myth is that the victim deserves the abuse. Batterers have a sense of entitlement, like I said. They believe that they are completely justified in the way that they behave. They tell their partner and themselves that the victim deserves to be beaten. Some batterers like to use their own experiences with abuse as an excuse to beat their victim. This particular breed of batterer believes that they can't help battering because it's in their blood, or they genuinely believe that battering is how problems are solved because that's how it was done in their childhood home. An abusive childhood is not an excuse to batter other people. Adults who may have grown up in abusive situations are more than capable of learning problem-solving methods that are non-violent. This may take a considerable amount of individualized therapy, but it is possible. Batterers usually like to believe that physical violence is the only form of domestic violence. They think that because they haven't hit their victim, they aren't abusing them. This is not true. There are many forms of non-physical domestic violence, including psychological, spiritual, and economic abuse. Batterers like to believe that the abuse they perpetrate is unintentional. They'll say that they didn't mean it or they just got carried away. Domestic violence in all its forms is very much intentional. There's too much to explain about that, so I'm not going to get into it here. So if you don't believe me or if you'd like more information on that, you can go watch my video on this topic. People who batter believe that feelings cause behavior, and they want you to believe that too. That way they can think, you made me mad, so I am justified in hitting you or calling you names. They want you to believe that anger and frustration cause violence. That way they can blame you for the abuse. In actuality, it's not our feelings, but our attitudes toward the opposite sex and our behavioral habits that affect the decisions we make about how to act in a dispute. It's a huge misconception that abusive individuals have anger management issues. Even if an individual has poor impulse control, and this is probable with abusive partners, they still know better than to blow up in front of their boss or in front of your family, someone or somewhere where it will get them in trouble. The batterer controls themselves, managing their emotions, and they wait until you are both alone with no one else around to witness before they abuse you. Domestic violence is not caused by the batterer's lack of control, but by a desire to gain control. Most abusers will only hit the victims when other people aren't around, and they will only punch where the bruises won't show and cause a commotion. They are skilled manipulators in that they know exactly what they're doing, though they may not always understand why they do it. Batterers can control themselves when it suits them most to do so, especially around authorities. Another myth is that drinking and drugs cause domestic violence. It's very important for me to mention that although there is a correlation between substance abuse and domestic violence, alcohol and other chemical substances do not cause domestic violence, though they can facilitate it. Not all people who drink or do drugs are domestic violence perpetrators, and not all batterers need alcohol or drugs to become violent. Likewise, substance abuse recovery does not equate to domestic violence cessation. However, abusers still like to use these personal demons as an excuse for their behavior. Though drugs and alcohol can contribute to domestic violence by facilitating poor impulse control, for example, being drunk or high does not remove the responsibility for their actions. You are still responsible for everything that you did when you were drunk or high, though a batterer will usually deny this. Along this same strain is the notion that mental illness can cause domestic violence. Again, the vast majority of people with mental illnesses don't batter other people. If a batterer is selective about when or where or whom they abuse, when their actions indicate that they are aware enough to make choices in their behavior, it's only when the abuse becomes random or erratic, when they start targeting strangers in addition to people that they know, and when the abuse becomes open and public, that mental illness really becomes a possibility. In general, though, mental illness is more of a result rather than the cause of domestic violence. The idea that stress can cause abuse is another myth that batterers like to use as an excuse. Everyone responds to stress differently. When stressful situations arise, you have to make a decision about how to act, how to handle the situation. There are plenty of nonviolent methods to use to let off steam, and people in healthy relationships learn to use them. Batterers will choose violence. Due to patriarchal traditions passed down in our society, those boys who grow up with notions of male privilege are more likely to become abusive men as adults. Rigid and traditional attitudes toward gender roles are common amongst abusers. Battering men may believe that women are inferior to men, and therefore they believe that men have a right to control or dominate the lesser sex. Battering men usually believe that they are the lord of the house and that they have a right to enforce authority within the walls as necessary. When a woman denies domestic services to an abusive man, he feels the need to demonstrate his perceived male authority, which results in the abusive episode. The abuse can be verbal in the form of name-calling or labeling. It can be physical, where he flat out beats her, or it can be sexual, where the man forces his partner to have sex, called marital rape, or to perform sexual acts that she's not comfortable with. Abusive men with these old school attitudes view sex as just another domestic service that women are obliged to perform, along with cleaning, cooking, and childcare. Like I mentioned before, it's a sense of entitlement. Batterers are almost narcissistic in the sense that they are very self-focused. They expect you to revolve around their needs. They believe that they should come first in your life and be your first priority. Batterers often learn violent behavior from other people in the community, from the media, from cultural influences, or from inside their own families. They may have witnessed domestic violence a lot, or they may have been a victim of it themselves. Children who grow up witnessing domestic violence can end up learning that violence is an acceptable way to resolve conflict between parties. Abusive parents can pass down their attitudes and their habits to their children. Boys can come away with the idea that women don't command as much respect as men do. Young boys who regularly see violence against women are more likely to imitate it when they grow up. Young girls who witness violence are more likely to fall victim to it later in life. It's not necessarily a cycle, because not all abused children become abusive partners or perpetual victims. There are plenty of survivors out there who have gone on to have normal, healthy relationships. But what I am saying is that domestic violence can leave certain impressions on children, and it can leave a very negative impact in many ways. This is why it is so important for children coming from abusive households to receive therapy to counter the effects of the abuse and to teach them the proper ways to handle conflict. And lastly, batterers beat their partners because they believe that they can get away with it. Maybe because they have gotten away with it in the past. If a batterer believes that they will not suffer consequences for their actions, then they're more likely to continue to do them. Simple as that. Now, this doesn't mean that victims should go around threatening to call the cops on their batterers, because depending on the situation, that could be very dangerous. It could end up provoking more aggression. But what I am saying is that individuals in any and all relationships, including abusive relationships, need to make it very clear what behaviors will not be tolerated within the relationship. Let there be consequences for the crimes. If they continue to batter, follow through with the consequences, the best of which would be getting out and staying out of a cyclically abusive relationship and involving the authorities. But only do this when you are safely out of harm's reach, where they can't, come at you in retaliation. Domestic violence is a crime, and every batterer should pay for it. So that's it for tonight. I'm leaving some resources in the section below, and if you want more information, so just look there. And have a good night.